doing okay. Today is, I guess you can't necessarily call it a holiday, but it is somewhat of an important day. Today, Mueller report. This is the day that we've all waited for. This is the day where the Mueller report is released. I sat there this morning at 9 o'clock. I had a doctor's visit and I watched. I had to be up at, I think it was like 4 or 5 a.m. this morning. And I watched the mainstream media tick down to the very moment where Barr gave his press conference. William Barr, Attorney General. And I listened to this, and if this doesn't put a death nail in this notion of Trump colluding with Russian conspiracy theory, I don't know what will. Now, to be fair, we haven't necessarily, it's 400 pages or more than 400 pages. I'm not a speed reader, and I don't necessarily know anyone that is a speed reader, and I would imagine more information is probably going to be revealed as this goes on. But William Barr, in this press conference, went further than other scenarios in being very explicit that there was no collusion. Now, people like Uyghur would ask the question, what did they actually investigate? In which case, we'll be able to see that as we go further into the report. But based on the press conference, and I'm going to let you hear it for yourself, I don't want you to just take my word for it, he was pretty strong on this point, that there was no collusion, that there were no Americans that were caught colluding with the Russians on this, that the Russians that were responsible for, you can say, sponsoring some kind of election interaction, mind you, something that all countries do and that the United States does in spades. We don't necessarily have a ground to stand on here, but making this point that they're still at large, I will put to you that they will be at large for the rest, forever, in perpetuity. It's like an astronaut falling through a black hole. It just stays there in perpetuity forever. The universe will end before we will ever see that astronaut fall into the black hole. In the same way, the universe will end before we ever see Russians being locked up, or even, you could say, even convicted in this case, for whatever this kind of hacking or dropping Facebook and Twitter ads. But nevertheless, I'm going to let you hear it from William Barr yourself. Let's be honest, though. Nothing that Barr says will make people who, for the most part, has gone with a conspiracy theory for 3 years, change their mind on this. There are some that have a certain degree of integrity that have backed away from this, but many of them, for the most part, have just kept digging. Nevertheless, I'm going to let you hear from his own mouth. It's about 60 minutes long. I don't know if I'm going to go through all the questions, but at the very least, you can hear him make this point about this notion of collusion being off the table. And the reporters, they ask such weird questions. One of the reporters says, "Hey, how do you know that Mueller didn't want Congress to how do you know that Mueller didn't want Congress to make the choice on whether or not to go after Trump?" Now, this is such an odd thing because this will be something that no one has ever done before. You would think that a process that is somewhat of a judicial process would stay within the context of a judicial process. But they're going to the point of jumping the shark, saying that this should have went to the legislative branch. These are reporters, stenographers, who've been raising these type of questions. Just odd, bizarre stuff. They're looking for anything that they can find to hit Trump on. But nevertheless, it sounds like he's clearing Trump on this, at least from the standpoint of collusion. Again, we got to read the report to figure out what he investigated, because again, this is probably not going to be enough for some people who've been looking into this. But Barr goes further than he's gone, at least that I've heard of, into making this point that we found no evidence of collusion between Trump and Russia. There's also an offhand remark about Julian Assange. This was done almost as a throwaway, and I don't even know if people really paid attention to this, but he was making this point about the evidence being WikiLeaks, that there is no crime associated with providing that you weren't involved in the hack itself. Now, if you remember, they're trying to make Julian Assange look as if Julian Assange is a hacker, as opposed to someone who is just posting the information up, which is what WikiLeaks was doing. Now, if the United States can't legitimately show that he was a quote-unquote hacker, it sounds like, based on what Barr is saying, that this case kind of falls away. That said, there are going to be extradition charges and everything else, and it'll be interesting to see how this plays in the UK. But let's hear Barr. Let's hear Barr make his case. All right, let's hear Barr make his case. I'm sorry, this went way too long. Come on. There we go.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks for being here this morning. As you know, on March 22nd, Special Counsel Robert Mueller concluded his investigation into matters related to Russian attempts to interfere in our 2016 presidential election, and he submitted his confidential report to me pursuant to department regulations. As I said during my Senate confirmation hearing and since, I'm committed to ensuring the greatest degree possible of transparency concerning the special counsel's investigation, consistent with the law. At 11 this morning, I'm going to transmit copies of the public version of the special counsel's report to the chairman and ranking members of the Senate and House Judiciary Committees. The Department of Justice will also make the report available to the American people by posting it on the department's website after it has been delivered to Congress. I'd like to make a few comments today on the report. Before I do that, I want to thank Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein for joining me here today and for his assistance and counsel throughout this process. Rod, as you know, has served at the department for nearly 30 years with dedication and distinction, and it's been a great privilege and pleasure for me to work with him since my confirmation. He had well-deserved plans to step back from public service that were interrupted by my asking him to help in my transition. Rod has been an invaluable partner, and I am grateful that he is willing to help me and has been able to see the special counsel's investigation through to its conclusion. Thanks, Rod. Thank you. Yeah. I'd also like to thank Special Counsel Robert Mueller for his service and the thoroughness of his investigation, particularly his work exposing the nature of Russia's attempts to interfere in our electoral process. As you know, one of the primary purposes of the Special Counsel's investigation was to determine whether President Trump's campaign or any individual associated with it conspired or coordinated with the Russian government to interfere in the 2016 election. Volume 1 of the Special Counsel's report describes the results of that investigation. As you will see, the Special Counsel's report states that his, quote, investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. I am sure that all Americans share my concern about the efforts of the Russian government to interfere in our presidential election. As the Special Counsel report makes clear, the Russian government sought to interfere in our election process. But thanks to the Special Counsel's thorough investigation, we now know that the Russian operatives who perpetrated these schemes did not have the cooperation of President Trump or the Trump campaign, or the knowing assistance of any other American for that matter. That is something that all Americans can and should be grateful to have confirmed.
There's no caveat here. Confirmed. No. He's being very clear in the language that he's using. There is no hedge. Again, we have to read the entirety of the document. But up to this point, there's no hedge in his language.
The special counsel report outlines two main efforts by the Russian government to influence the 2016 election. First, the report details efforts by the Internet Research Agency, a Russian company with close ties to the Russian government, to sow social discord among American voters through disinformation and social media operations. Following a thorough investigation of this disinformation campaign,
to be explicit, he's talking about Facebook and Twitter ads. He is literally talking about Facebook and Twitter ads, half of which, more than half, took place after the election. So I just want to be very clear what we're saying. This disinformation campaign and all this other stuff, acting like this was a sophisticated campaign in order to take down Facebook and Twitter ads. At worst, and I'm saying at worst because I don't even know if I take this notion in that this is somehow orchestrated by Vladimir Putin in the way that they're making it seem. So, but whatever. At worst, Facebook and Twitter ads. Let's hear him finish.
The special counsel brought charges in federal court against several Russian nationals and entities for their respective roles in this scheme. Those charges remain pending, and the individual defendants remain at large. But the special counsel found no evidence that any American, including anyone associated with the Trump campaign, conspired or coordinated with the Russian government or the IRA in this illegal scheme. Indeed, as the report states, quote, the investigation did not identify evidence that any U.S. person knowingly or intentionally coordinated with the IRA's interference operation, unquote.
Just so we're clear, because I want to make this point clear, I don't like Donald Trump. So I don't come at this from the perspective of somebody who's a Trump supporter, who's chest thumping this from Trump. I come from the perspective of somebody who has been somewhat skeptical of the narrative that has been put out for the past 3 years. And that, from my perspective as a lefty, I want it to be very clear and understood by everybody that Clinton lost on her own merits. It wasn't because of some Trump and Russia stuff that she lost on her own merits. That status quo entirely and utterly failed to a reality show host. They chose Donald Trump, somebody who the majority of the population didn't even believe was qualified for the job, over Hillary Clinton. That's how much they were looking for a change. That's how much they were against the established order of things. That's the way I come from this. So when I hear this, and he's saying there is no evidence, not that we couldn't come to a decision on this, or not that, there wasn't a preponderance of something. He says there is no evidence. There's no evidence. Let's let him finish. And again, I don't come at this as somebody that thinks Trump is awesome. I come at this from the perspective, look, they were trying to cover their loss. Now, the lefties had made this point that if you run Clinton in an anti-establishment period, you are going to lose, or at the very least your chances for losing is going to be that much more. This idea of Democrats not being able to deal with the fact that Hillary Clinton lost and coming up with one excuse after the next, this particular excuse being Donald Trump and the Russians somehow conspired in order to sack Hillary Clinton or take the election from Hillary Clinton, this attack on democracy itself. My point in this was that this was nonsense, that she lost on her own merits. When I hear this, what I hear is she lost on her own merits. That's what I hear. Let's let him finish.
Put another way, the special counsel found no collusion by any Americans in IRA's illegal activities. Second, the report details efforts by the Russian military officials associated with the GRU, the Russian Military Intelligence Organization, to hack into computers and steal documents and emails from individuals associated with the Democratic Party and Hillary Clinton's campaign for the purpose of eventually publicizing these documents. Obtaining such unauthorized access into computers Following a thorough investigation of these hacking operations, the special counsel brought charges in federal court against several Russian military officers for their respective roles in these illegal hacking operations. Those charges are still pending, and the defendants remain at large. But again, the special counsel's report did not find any evidence that members of the Trump campaign or anyone associated with the campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in these hacking operations. In other words, there was no evidence of the Trump campaign collusion with the Russian government's hacking.
Again, no hedge, straightforward, zero evidence. Not a preponderance of the evidence shows that he was innocent. No, zero evidence. Zero evidence. This was made out of whole cloth. Let's let him keep going.
The special counsel's investigation also examined Russian efforts to publish stolen emails and documents on the internet. The special counsel found that after the GRU disseminated some of the stolen documents to entities that it controlled, DC Leaks and Guccifer 2, the GRU transferred some of the stolen materials to WikiLeaks for publication. WikiLeaks then made a series of document dumps. The special counsel also investigated whether any member or affiliate of the Trump campaign encouraged or otherwise played a role in these dissemination efforts. Under applicable law, publication of these types of material would not be criminal unless the publisher also participated in the underlying hacking conspiracy. Here, too, the special counsel's report did not find that any person associated with the Trump campaign illegally participated in the dissemination of the materials.
Call me crazy, but what he just said there is somewhat of a big deal. I mean, I understand the Trump part. He's like, look, if he wants to say the GRU, okay. The GRU gets their hands on information. And based on their own narrative of events, so this information is given to WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks decides to publish and puts this information up. But he makes this point that insofar as no hacking had taken place, meaning insofar as the only thing that WikiLeaks was responsible for doing, or the publisher was always just publishing the information, that is not a crime. Part of the reason that they need to make Julian Assange look like a hacker in this way, that he was somehow instrumental or involved in the pulling of the information, is because that's the only way they can get him on a crime. Otherwise, they have squat. And I have to be honest, they're not getting Julian Assange. What they're pulling Julian Assange was for issues concerning Manning. But either way, the precedent that what he just said still remains to be true. If the only thing that Julian Assange did was push the information up, the United States has nothing to hold him on, at least based on the Attorney General, Barr. So let's let him keep going.
Finally, the special counsel investigated a number of links or contacts between the Trump campaign officials and individuals connected with the Russian government during the 2016 presidential campaign. After reviewing these contacts, the special counsel did not find any conspiracy to violate U.S. law involving Russian-linked persons and any persons associated with the Trump campaign. So that's the bottom line. After nearly 2 years of investigation, thousands of subpoenas, hundreds of warrants, and witness interviews, the special counsel confirmed that the Russian government sponsored efforts to illegally interfere with the 2016 presidential election, but did not find that the Trump campaign or other Americans colluded in those efforts. After finding no underlying collusion with Russia, the special counsel's report goes on to consider whether certain actions of the president could amount to obstruction of the special counsel's investigation.
All right, But before we get to that part, let's just be ironclad, crystal, glass-like clear. Absolute clarity. Whether you agree or not with the Russia stuff, I'm sketchy with the Russia stuff. I mean, even if you say that they were doing Facebook and Twitter ads, I have to be honest, I don't particularly care. I mean, we've stepped into Russian politics in far more significant ways, like getting Yeltsin elected, for example. I mean, so this notion of Facebook and Twitter ads, and I think it's even a question on whether or not these Facebook and Twitter ads are linked to the Russian government in a way that these guys are saying they're linked to the Russian government, as opposed to these people out trying to maximize their own profits. It's kind of capitalistic endeavors. But either way, however you want to look at it, one of the key and central theses, or the central thesis to this, was that Donald Trump was colluding with the Russian government. And in one way after the next, that story has been shot down. He went through painstaking detail to shoot the story down. Now, the question that Uyghur, or people like Uyghur, is going to ask, well, how far did that investigation go? The report is out now at this point, so I would imagine that that question is going to be answered pretty soon. But in this case, it sounded like the breath that these guys were using, meaning the business and all this other stuff. He seemed to be pretty straightforward in saying, we found nothing in this. So, before we move on to the next part, I just want that to be very clear. The central thesis for the last 3 years that media has been going with was that Russia and Trump were somehow working in tandem with one another. And Uyghur going so far as to say that Trump was a plant by the Russian government and that Vladimir Putin was giving him instructions. I'm just saying, that this part of the narrative is being shot down. That's all I'm saying. This part of the narrative is being shot down. So let's go to the other part. And before we move on to the other part, let's see. Joel Sass. So what do you think? Will the DNC finally understand that it was a leak, probably self-rich? The forensicator proved that Lucifer 2 was a LARP. They will never own up to that. That it was a leak as opposed to a hack? Never. You must understand the narrative at this point has been set. It doesn't necessarily matter what's true. The narrative at this point has been set. And whatever we want to think about, them saying Trump didn't have anything to do with the Russian government or whatever, what has just happened here has been an instantiation of the narrative. Meaning, from a historical standpoint, it is going to be looked at as the Russian government interceded in the U.S. politics. Now, whether or not there was any validity to it, meaning there was any gains to be made by this, is going to be somewhat irrelevant. The narrative has been somewhat instantiated. They're never going to approach this thing that, whether it was a leak versus a hack, it doesn't necessarily suit their narrative. And the media that has ran with this narrative for the last 3 years, they're not going to, they don't even engage that they fucked this up magnificently for the last 3 years. They've been defending how they've been even recounting the story. So, any notion that media is going to somehow start questioning the narrative that they have instantiated at this point, I'm extremely skeptical. You have no idea. I have never been more skeptical of anything in my life. Baltazar, the Russian conclusion is a collusion delusion. 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 Bet you didn't think I could do that. Degrees in defiance. Yes. Killing combined with CrowdStrike nonsense, 100% cover-up. It comes across as a cover-up to me. It's like, you're the FBI. Why didn't you get your hand on the DNC servers? That just seems to be one of the most bizarre. Like, when you think of all of this, everything that's happened with this, that one part sticks out to me. That's such a bizarre thing to me. You had raids on Cohen. You had raids on Roger Stone. Roger Stone is probably one of the most insignificant people on the planet. You had a raid on his house in this kind of, Gestapo raid where you're kicking in doors or whatever. But you couldn't get your hands on the DNC servers? Yeah, that just seems a little dicey to me. That seems a little dicey. Let's let Barr finish. But Barr, he has put a knife. They've been asking for this Mueller report to come out. And it is possible that this Mueller report is going to be the worst nightmare to them. Because if Mueller was as expansive as I think he was, it puts a knife in this notion. Well, we'll see. I think there are going to be some people who still going to keep digging.
As I addressed in my March 24th letter, the special counsel did not make a traditional prosecutorial judgment regarding this allegation. Instead,
and by the way, this one is on obstruction. Now, understand how bizarre this is. A crime that wasn't committed, meaning no crime has taken place. And it's like, but you've obstructed something that didn't take place. So that's a hard bridge to get to in and of itself. And if you, as Donald Trump, believes that this is indeed a political witch hunt, that this is made out of whole cloth, you know that you have no association with Russia in these terms, and you think it to yourself, they're out to get me, this is a witch hunt. Would you be a little bit freaked out with the way that all of this kind of has been whipped up? Yeah, I think you would be freaked out. I think anybody would be freaked out, especially if you think the fix is in. It makes all the sense in the world that he would be attacking these guys, particularly when he thinks the fix is in, and that this is not a legal issue, that this is somewhat of a quasi-political issue. Well, but let's let him talk about obstruction.
The report recounts 10 episodes involving the president and discusses potential legal theories for connecting those activities to the elements of an obstruction offense. After carefully reviewing the facts and legal theories outlined in the report, and in consultation with the Office of Legal Counsel and other department lawyers, the Deputy Attorney General and I concluded that the evidence developed by the special counsel is not sufficient to establish that the president committed an obstruction of justice offense. Although the Deputy Attorney General and I disagreed with some of the special counsel's legal theories and felt that some of the episodes examined did not amount to obstruction as a matter of law, we did not rely solely on that in making our decision. Instead, we accepted the special counsel's legal framework for purposes of our analysis and evaluated the evidence as presented by the special counsel in reaching our conclusions.
By the way, just so we're clear, there is a double standard. Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, in the way that media looks at Republicans versus the way media looks at Democrats. I think this issue kind of makes this extremely clear, because I think if the roles were reversed, this would be, I just think it would be handled differently. Obama got to choose Loretta Lynch. It's constitutional authority to do so. And God bless him. Loretta Lynch was overseeing a case of that same Obama's Secretary of State. And not just Secretary of State or former Secretary of State, the person who was running for President of the United States. All the incentives in the world are for Loretta Lynch to either look the other way or to assist in not prosecuting Hillary Clinton, while simultaneously looking as if she has nothing to do with it at all. Meaning, her goal in this is to get Clinton off, while at the same token realizing that she can't come across as if she's trying to get Clinton off. So what did she say? I'm not going to have anything to do with this case. This case is going to be just Comey, and however he comes to me, that's going to be the recommendation that we go with. We find out later on that that wasn't necessarily entirely true, that they were pushing back on some of the things that Comey was bringing forth, meaning crimes that they thought Hillary Clinton might have been guilty of. I guess I'm making the point that in the same way it was Obama's discretion to put Loretta Lynch on a case that she clearly should not have been on, it is Trump's discretion to do the same. You can't poke a finger at this and say, oh my God, look at this cover up, while simultaneously looking at what was taking place back in 2016 as if all fair, nothing to see here, folks. Just saying, you can't have it both ways. If it was okay for Obama to choose his attorney general, it is okay for Trump to do the same. Just saying.
In assessing the president's actions discussed in the report, it is important to bear in mind the context. President Trump faced an unprecedented situation. As he entered into office and sought to perform his responsibilities as president, federal agents and prosecutors were scrutinizing his conduct before and after taking office and the conduct of some of his associates. At the same time, there was relentless speculation in the news media about the president's personal culpability.
Scrutinizing before and after, that's an interesting turn of a phrase, right? The president's actions were being scrutinized before and after he took office. If they were being scrutinized before he took office, isn't that effectively spying? I mean, the president is a Democratic president. The Secretary of State that he put in office is running against Donald Trump in this case. And based on what is found to be nonsense, meaning made out of, for all intents and purposes, whole cloth, they were able to spy and in some cases put moles into Trump's campaign. That's what he means when he's saying before and after. The before part is the part that's problematic. It sounds like one political party was using the measures or means of, let's say, the federal government to spy on their political opponents. Not necessarily saying this was an Obama choice. I'm just saying that's what it looks like when you're looking at let's say the wide contours of what took place. But that's what it sounds like he's saying.
Yet, as he said from the beginning, there was in fact no collusion. And as the special counsel's report acknowledges, there is substantial evidence to show that the president was frustrated and angered by his sincere belief that the investigation was undermining his presidency, propelled by his political opponents, and fueled by illegal leaks. Nonetheless, the White House fully cooperated with the special counsel's investigation, providing unfettered access to campaign and White House documents, directing senior aides to testify freely, and asserting no privilege claims. And at the same time, the president took no act that in fact deprived the special counsel of the documents and witnesses necessary to complete his investigation.
So the interesting part here is that Barr is right. That it makes all the sense in the world that if you were president of the United States, you get in office with a platform of being somewhat more conciliatory towards a country that you've historically have had conflicts with, and the intelligence services of the country itself turns and looks at you based on what was a political hit job by your political opponent, and makes it as if that you are somehow in collusion with that other government just because your policies are more conciliatory. Now, if that was you and you were in that situation, what you can do in that office is constrained. If Donald Trump wants to pull troops out of Syria, he's not doing it because he ran on that in a campaign standpoint. He's doing it because Vladimir Putin in Russia. It constrains his behavior in regards to what he can do. The political climate of the country makes or impinges upon political policy. So yeah, you would imagine that would have some aspect that would be detrimental to, regardless of the political party or regardless of how gross the individual is, that would wear on you. So that kind of makes sense. But I gotta be honest, I never bought this argument that just said the only thing that explains Donald Trump's behavior is that Donald Trump was somehow guilty. That's somewhat of a self-serving argument. It also explains his behavior if he thinks that you're just going after him and he thinks that this is a political hit job. That just as well explains his behavior as the other.
Apart from whether
hypothesis.
the acts were obstructive, this evidence of non-corrupt motives weighs heavily against any allegation that the president had a corrupt intent to obstruct the investigation. Now, before I take questions, I want to address a few aspects of the process for producing the public report that I am releasing today. As I said several times, the report contains limited redactions related to 4 categories of information. To ensure as much transparency as possible, those redactions have been clearly labeled so that the readers can tell which redactions correspond to which categories. Now, to recall, those categories are 6E material, grand jury material, information that the IC believes would disclose sources and methods, information that would impair the investigation and prosecution of other cases that are underway, and finally, information that implicates the privacy and reputational interests of peripheral third parties. As you will see, most of the redactions were compelled by the need to prevent harm to ongoing matters and to comply with court orders prohibiting the public disclosure of information bearing on ongoing investigation.
You already know what they're going to say, right? Cover up. I've already heard it. In fact, before he even came out to do this press conference, you could hear the chatter of this is a cover up. He's covering something up. He's trying to protect Donald Trump. My mom, and I love her to death, is saying the same thing. Oh, he's hiding something. You know he's dirty. There's something in there that he's hiding. This guy is just a fixer. He's just a cleaner-upper. That's all this guy is. I said, you've given up one conspiracy theory and moved on to the next conspiracy theory. It's like, what conspiracy theory? I said, what is he guilty of? What crime is he guilty of in your eyes in this sense? Meaning from the standpoint of collusion with Trump and Russia. This is a nail, I'm sorry, has been driven in this particular story. Yeah, a nail has been driven in this story. But again, we'll find out more as we go through the documents. But Barr is not hedging his language. Barr is very clear when he's making the point that the president, or for that matter, no other American, was involved in any kind of campaign to adversely affect the election. He was very clear. Let's hear some of the questions.
Today on consistent with long-standing Special Counsel's report. Accordingly, the Public Report on Ethics in Government Act, which permitted individuals also working with Congress to accommodate their legitimate oversight interests with respect to the Special Counsel's investigation. We have been consulted that the publicly released report will accommodate congressional requests from several congressional committees to see all.
I'm sorry, I'm moving this up to the point where he's giving questions, and maybe questions is not a part of this particular one. Let's see. Yeah, let's
understand it. I will never understand his presidency.
Okay. Where is my... It's live television. I'll cut this out. There we are.
Or not there was an obstruction offense. But I will say that
his feelings and his
with
all right.
limited exception
So let's
of that which
hear
continue to do
a few of the questions.
any allegation that the president had a corrupt intent to obstruct the investigation. Now, before I take questions, I want to address a few aspects of the process over which the President Counsel's investigation.
What did you disagree with
on?
She asked them, what did he disagree with him on? Earlier, he made note, he brought it up himself, that there were aspects of the case that he disagreed with Mueller on. And she's asking him, what are the aspects of this case that you disagree with Mueller on? What's the legal reasoning that you disagree with him on, or the framework? He said he disagreed with the framework and the way that Mueller was looking at some of this stuff. So here's the answer.
I'd leave it to his description in the report, the special counsel's own articulation of why he did not want to make a determination as to whether or not there was an obstruction offense. But I will say that when we met with him, Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein and I met with him along with Ed O'Callahan, who is the principal associate deputy. On March 5th, we specifically asked him about the OLC opinion and whether or not he was taking the position that he would have found a crime but for the existence of the OLC opinion. And he made it very clear several times that that was not his position. He was not saying that but for the OLC opinion he would have found a crime. He made it clear that he had not made the determination that there was a crime.
Did you disagree with him on?
May I follow up on that, Mr. Attorney General?
What did you disagree with him on?
Given that, why did you and Mr. Rosenstein feel the need you had to take it to the next step to conclude that there was no crime, especially given that DOJ policy?
Well, the very prosecutorial function and all our powers as prosecutors, including the power to convene grand juries and the compulsory process that's involved there, is for one purpose and one purpose only. It's determine yes or no. Was alleged conduct criminal or not criminal? That is our responsibility, and that's why we have the tools we have. And we don't go through this process just to collect information and throw it out to the public. We collect this information, we use that compulsory process for the purpose of making that decision. And because the special counsel did not make that decision, we felt the department had to, and that was a decision by me and the Deputy Attorney General. Yes.
Or did the special counsel?
By the way, if you notice, Rothstein is back there. He's standing right there with him. He's standing right there with him because he initially opened the case himself. He was the one that appointed the special prosecutor. And because he was the one that appointed the special prosecutor, he wanted there to be a certain continuity that at the very least they're on the same page with what is taking place. I mean, after all, with Rothstein, I always mispronounce his name. Is Rod going to be standing there if he disagreed with what was being said? This is them having a certain degree of solidarity. And again, for those who think that there's some kind of cover-up here, I don't necessarily think Rod will be standing there if there was. But let's keep going. And I'm talking about Hillary supporters that think that this guy's trying to cover something up.
Counsel indicate that he wanted you to make the decision or that it should be left for Congress? And also, how do you respond to criticism you're receiving from congressional Democrats that you're acting more as an attorney for the president rather than as the chief law enforcement officer?
Are Democrats trying to intimidate the Attorney General? Is that what's taking place? Are Democrats attacking the Attorney General? Now, when Donald Trump was going after the special prosecutor, their hair was on fire. Oh my God, he's trying to intimidate Mueller. Oh my God, he's trying to obstruct justice. He's making a decision. He made the choice. It was his responsibility to make the choice. And now they're attacking him for that choice, as if they're trying to limit or constrain his actions. Or is the Democratic Party attacking the Attorney General of the United States?
Special Counsel Mueller did not indicate that his purpose was to leave the decision to Congress. I hope that was not his view, since we don't convene grand juries and conduct criminal investigations for that purpose. He did not. I didn't talk to him directly about the fact that we were making the decision, but I am told that his reaction to that was that it was my prerogative as Attorney General to make that decision.
Attorney General Barr here at Fox News. Hi there. Is there anything you can share today about your review of the genesis of the Russia investigation and whether assets have been provided to investigate?
Good question. Did she say Fox News? Good question. is there any information to date about the genesis of the investigation? I mean, after all, you've just come up here, and it's been 3 years where they've been screaming about Trump colluding with Russia. Trump is a Russian bot. Trump is working in the interests of Vladimir Putin. These are massively inflammatory things, but this is what was bantered around the media without any particular issue at all. In fact, the perspective of it was that Trump was colluding with Russia, and any perspective deviating from that was some degree of conspiracy theory. She's asking him a very basic point. You've just come up here and said all of that was hooey. None of it existed. All of that was made out of whole cloth. Then the next question has to be, how did this start? If all of this was made out of whole cloth, if all of this was bogus, how did it start? I mean, after all, we've ensnared the president in 3 years of an investigation saying that he was working with a foreign government in the interests of undermining America itself. How did it start? That's an amazingly good question.
No, today I'm really focused just on the process of releasing this report.
Senior Democrats in Congress have asked for Robert Mueller himself to testify.
He dodged.
Mueller remains a Justice Department employee as of this moment. Will you permit him to testify publicly to Congress?
I have no objection to Bob Mueller personally testifying.
Mr. Attorney General, it's not just Democrats who have questioned some of the process here. A Republican-appointed judge on Tuesday said you have, quote, created an environment that has caused a significant part of the American public to be concerned about these redactions. You cleared the president on obstruction. The president is fundraising off of your comments about spying. And here you have remarks that are quite generous to the president, including acknowledging his feelings and his emotions. So what do you say to people on both sides of the aisle who are concerned that you are trying to protect the president?
Well, actually, the statements about his sincere beliefs are recognized in the report, that there was substantial evidence for that. So I'm not sure what your basis is for saying that I am being generous to the president.
You face an unprecedented situation. It just seems like there's a lot of effort to go out of your way to acknowledge how this.
Well, is there another precedent for it?
No, but it's unusual.
Okay, so unprecedented is an accurate description, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay.
What do you say to people who are concerned that you are trying to protect the president?
Eric?
There's a lot of public interest in the absence of the special counsel and members of his team. Was he invited to join you up on the podium? Why is he not here? This is his report, obviously, that you're talking about today.
No, it's not. It's a report he did for me as the Attorney General. He is required under the regulation to provide me with a confidential report. I'm here to discuss my response to that report and my decision, entirely discretionary, to make it public.
I'm beginning to realize that I don't think they knew Mueller's job. Like, Mueller's job, Mueller was going to write a report. What he just said, that report was going to go to him. That report wasn't going to go to the media, wasn't going to go to the press. If you remember, there was this big to-do about trying to get this report to be open so other people can see the report. But the report was initially only supposed to go to him, and he was going to make a decision on what to do about it. It's as if they didn't know that. It's as if they don't know that. All right, let's let them keep going. They're almost done.
These reports are not supposed to be made public. That's what I'm here to discuss.
Impropriety for you to come out and sort of what appears to be sort of spinning the report before the public gets a chance to read it?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
William Barr. He has Rosenstein with him. So both of them are standing right there side by side, arm in arm. So you can't necessarily say that this was something that he himself was doing, since the guy who opened the investigation, or who at the very least started the special prosecutor, was standing right there side by side, arm in arm. Whatever you want to think, whether you want to think the Russians had something to do with it or not, I want to put that to the side for the moment. This seemed to be a full-throated clearing of Donald Trump on any notion of collusion. Not just a preponderance of the evidence, but there was no evidence. Which begs the question, how did this get to be what it was? Now, he dodged that question and said, he's just focusing on this. But that question has to be asked. We've been inundated for 3 years with this notion that the President of the United States is somehow a foreign asset. I think it's a big deal to figure out how did that take place and why it was allowed to propagate in the way that it propagated. I mean, after all, you had what was amounted to a conspiracy theory that was propagated across the entire country. I think it makes all the sense in the world to try to get to the bottom of how it started. So, all right. I am going to end this because this one has gone way, way too long, and I'm probably going to cut this video. In fact, not probably, I am definitely going to cut this video. I would imagine Donald Trump probably really liked what he heard there, and more information is probably going to be released as the document goes through, but we're going to get a clear idea on how extensive the investigation was. Let's say it that way. So, it's 400 pages. We'll know sooner rather than later. I'll leave it here. If you guys enjoyed the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through PayPal or Patreon. I'll see you guys in a few. I'm going to get lunch, and I'll see you guys later this evening. Thanks all.